Why are EVs more expensive than their petrol or diesel counterparts? This is generally down to the cost of the batteries. Batteries a few years back typically costed around £1,000 per kilowatt hour. This price has dropped in the region of around £140 per kilowatt hour. There are companies out there trying to bring costs down even further, so EVs are on par or cheaper than their ICE counterparts. If you would like to compare an EV cost to an ICE car, we have a checker on the Yorkshire EV Facebook page and website. How long do EV batteries last? As I've been told, they won't last more than 3 to 5 years. This is a common misconception. EV batteries will typically last well over 10 years. Once cells start to fail, you can have them replaced individually rather than replacing the whole battery. Car manufacturers guarantee their batteries for 7 to 8 years typically to not drop below 70% state of health, meaning on a full charge the battery only holds about 70% of its charge compared to new. Once the battery is no longer sufficient for use in the car, they can be given a second lease of life as home power storage devices. There is a company in Germany that can recycle up to 90% of the raw materials that are present in an EV battery. The power remaining in the battery before they are recycled is used to run the operation, and any surplus is pumped back into the grid. Why do manufacturers give you two battery capacities, overall and the usable, and why is usable always smaller? Overall is the total capacity of your battery. Usable is what the driver has access to. The usable is essentially a buffer to stop the user overcharging the battery or letting it go completely flat, which will then degrade the health of the battery very quickly. Typically when you charge a battery to a usable 100%, you are actually hitting about 95% overall. But when you drain the usable to 0%, you are typically draining it to about 5% overall. This is all managed by the BMS, the battery management system. Its job is to maintain battery health. A mobile phone does not have a BMS. That is why the batteries typically last only 2 to 3 years. EV cars use electric that is created by fossil fuel burning power stations, so they are no better than an ICE car. This is not true. Power sources in the UK are now cleaner than ever and are coal free. Other power sources like wind, hydro and solar are now supplying gigawatts of electricity. Research has shown that even if the EV is charging on electric from 100% coal-fired power stations, it will still have a smaller CO2 footprint than an ICE car. How much range does an EV have? Each car is different. Typically you are looking at around 200 miles range on a charge. Your average journey in the UK is around 11 miles, so well within the range of the EV. You can also charge at home during the night, so you have a full battery the next day. Other items that will affect an EV's range are temperature. Too low, 10 degrees centigrade and below, and the range reduces as the chemical efficiency of the battery reduces. The ideal temperature for an EV to be efficient is around 25 to 27 degrees centigrade. Terrain is another killer of battery range. If you live in a hilly area, range will reduce quicker than a flat landscape. But remember, you can recuperate some of the battery charge by using regen. Just remember, this is not a true 1-to-1 ratio, so you will charge the battery less than the power you've used to climb the hill in the first place. Why do all quick charging times always mention between 0 to 80%? This is because the charging speed is at its highest up to 80%. The last 20% takes much more time as the charging rate drops. Think of it as filling a jug. You fill the first portion of the jug up really quickly from the tap. The last portion is filled slowly as not to spill anything. Aren't EVs slow? The older generation ones were, but the new generation ones are more often than not faster than the ICE counterparts. This is because an electric motor's torque, the turning force, is linear, straight, from 0 RPM to its max RPM, which is unlike an ICE car that uses a gearbox to multiply its non-linear torque. into a usable power output, and ICE torque usually starts to tail off at around 4,500 RPM. Won't I be waiting around in the service station to allow the car to charge? Yes, but only for generally half an hour. If you are on a long journey, even in an ICE car, you usually stop for a comfort break and maybe a sit down for a coffee, which can be enough time for the EV to charge to 80%. Please remember that some public charging stations tend not to be as reliable as others. Many members of the Yorkshire EV Facebook page have reported problems with specific chargers handled by one company, Ecotricity. It is important to mention that this is not always the case though. An important tip: as certain charging networks have been found to be unreliable from time to time, always have a second and third backup plan to have enough range in your battery to make it to other charging stations around. What about servicing costs? Servicing on an EV is a lot cheaper and less frequent owing to the fact that there are only about 8 moving parts compared to an ICE car, which have thousands of moving parts. EVs are generally serviced every 2 years or 16 to 18,000 miles. Their ICE counterparts are generally every 1 year or 12,000 miles. Some of the older high-performance Mitsubishi cars are even every 6,000 miles. Also remember, an EV does not have a clutch, a gearbox or cam belt, which keeps the cost down. There are not enough chargers around, are there? There are more public chargers around the UK than petrol stations, and this number is increasing every day. The government is ramping up its efforts to install new chargers to hit the 2035 deadline, when all new cars sold will have to be electric. Also, a point to make: rapid and superchargers have a safety cut-off switch located on them to stop quickly charging if the case arises. My electric bills will go up, won't they? Well, yes, it will do, but you won't be spending nearly as much money compared to filling the tank of an ICE car. An EV is about 1 to 3 pence per mile to power. An ICE car is typically about 13 pence per mile to fuel, based on a car that can complete about 60 miles per gallon. Also, companies like Octopus Energy offer special tariffs at night time. Octopus Go is one of them that reduces the cost of a kilowatt hour from typically 14 pence to 5 pence. Another Octopus Energy tariff called Octopus Agile will even pay you money on the odd occasion when they have a surplus of electricity during the day. There might be gigawatts of spare electricity. EVs are not reliable, are they? An EV is more reliable than an ICE car. For example, Robert Llewellyn from Red Dwarf fame also hosts his own YouTube channel called Fully Charged, has owned a first generation Nissan Leaf for over 10 years and nothing has failed on it. There are lots of rare earth elements used in batteries, aren't there? This is one of the biggest fallacies circulating. There are currently 17 rare earth elements and not one of these is found in a lithium-ion battery. Fact: cobalt receives a bad rep in EV cars, but did you know that petrol and diesel production relies on cobalt to reduce the sulfur content in oil and is not recoverable? In reality, the biggest consumers in cobalt are the electronics industry that rely on lithium-ion batteries to power their tech. So if you own a mobile phone or even a laptop, you are guilty of this. The reliance of using cobalt from one of the biggest suppliers, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is steadily falling as other countries are ramping up their ability to supply cobalt. The grid can't support everyone's move to an EV today, can they? The answer is yes, it can, and for an explanation of why this is possible, please see the YouTube channel Plug Life Television and search for this series of videos called What Barriers? Balancing the Grid. It is in 3 parts and is narrated by Dr. Ewan McTurk, who knows a thing or two about EVs. EVs are silent and therefore people who are partially sighted or blind won't be able to hear them, will they? All electric vehicles from July the 1st, 2019 have to be fitted with sound emitters to protect people who are partially sighted or completely blind. So what happens to Vehicle Excise Duty, aka road tax, once all new sales of cars are going to be EVs, as the government will need to make some money on drivers? The current thinking is that EVs and possibly other non-EVs will have to pay per mile, but this is only a theory and there is no evidence to back this up as of yet.